The Wonderful World of Darklords. Attached notes. The Raven Nebula. 'Twas 5 nights before Christmas, and all through the mists, the Darklords were snarling and shaking their fists. Trapped in their domains, in their own special hells, they could not be made merry with presents or bells. But hark! What is this? Coming forth through the snow? A spelljamming ship with its red nose aglow!
Merry Christmas, season's greetings, happy holiday, and here is our present to you, dear listener, a bonus episode. Welcome to Wonderful World of Darklords, bonus episode 3, The Raven Nebula. I'm Tom.
I'm Rachel.
And normally in our podcast, we convert a Disney movie into a Ravenloft Domain of Dread, but for this Yuletide special episode, we are converting a Disney movie into a whole entire Ravenloft.
Or, if you prefer, we are converting a whole entire Ravenloft to a Disney movie.
So this is the bonus episode we talked about in the episode that you hope you listened to about a week ago, Treasure Planet. And this is trying to do a conversion of Treasure Planet that is an actual planet, where we are preserving the premise and the aesthetic that is so important to Treasure Planet of the solar sailing kind of high fantasy space adventure. Fortunately for us, there is a perfect D&D overlap for that, which is Spelljammer.
I was looking at the Treasure Planet page on TV Tropes, and somebody was saying this is the closest thing to a Spelljammer movie we're ever going to get, and yes, that is correct.
So we've got a D&D-ification of it already with Spelljammer that preserves everything we love about it, and some of what we don't, like Morph. But that's not what we're doing. That's not the D&D we're doing. We are doing Ravenloft. And we were talking about this and trying to figure out how to make this work. And the whole that Treasure Planet, even Spelljammering, doesn't really work for mainstream Ravenloft. We've got our storyline with our narrator Dee. And as we mentioned in the Treasure Planet episode, it doesn't really work for her to, get on a spaceship and then go to space and then come back and go to, Agrippa or whatever.
And Dee is kind of acting as a stand-in for your PCs here. She's the one kind of going and experiencing these domains and everything. So if it doesn't work for Dee to do it, it doesn't work for your PCs to do it. It would be just as much of a tonal shift. And
we were trying to think, could it be that the domain is specifically a little Spelljammer domain in Ravenloft, and there's Barovia, and there's Darkon, and there's spaceships. And once again, it was too tonally jarring. But then Rachel cracked the case, thought of the brilliant cutting of the Gordian knot to make this work as a Ravenloft Spelljammer setting.
Oh, I had forgotten this was my idea.
It was your idea.
Wow, go me. Yeah, so the whole thing with Spelljammer, and I say this as though I've read the Spelljammer stuff, I haven't, Tom has, but the whole thing with Spelljammer is it's got all the different systems in wildspace and everything. So what if we had this nebula, the Raven Nebula, that was separate from all the rest of wildspace, and once you go to the nebula, you're stuck there. Everyone knows if you end up there, you are not getting out. But in that nebula, there are a whole bunch of different systems and planets that you can travel in between, and they all have their different horror flavors. Mm-hmm. Since Spelljammer has the discrete systems already that you have to travel through this bizarre kind of ethereal substance to get to, it really is a very similar mechanic to Ravenloft, just with a completely different tone.
So, yeah, she said, what if the regular domains were the planets? And it was lightning struck my brain. It's perfect. Because it could be this one planet that was Treasure Island, Treasure Planet, but that doesn't work. It needs to be this whole setting. Mm-hmm. You need trade to do piracy, as we said, but just boom, that's it, of course. It's Ravenloft as a Spelljammer setting with the systems, with the worlds as the canon domains. Mm-hmm. And that gives you trade, and that gives you exchange, and that gives you piracy, and that's everything you need to do Treasure Planet in Ravenloft, in space.
And if you want to do Ravenloft in space, that's just, Event Horizon is a whole movie about that.
There is, and I'm working on an adaptation of it. So,
and it's not even John Carpenter.
That's how much I love Event Horizon. So, fundamentally, the pitch is the Raven Nebula is our version of Ravenloft. The different canon domains, Barovia, Darkon, etc., are the worlds of this nebula. You travel through them, and We're also going to be including this new domain called the Ethereum, and that is our treasure planet domain. So in this nebula, you've got the canon Ravenloft domains, and you've got our new Long John Silver Dark Lord. We're not going to talk too much about it because it is basically what we did with Treasure Planet, but in space.
But actually, Treasure Planet.
Change the word boat to spaceship.
We're not doing any of our other Disney domains as systems, although Lion King in Space sounds pretty great.
Hit us up if you want us to do this.
Yeah.
So part of what we are doing with this project, we're going to talk a little bit about it, but we are going to write it up on DM's Guild as a setting book. This is going to be pay. This is going to be... because it is a lot more work than our average domain write-up.
We want to give you guys everything for free. We love you, our listeners. If there was some special way that we could give it to our listeners totally for free and make all the other people pay, we would. But
we are going to give our listeners a 50% discount. There is going to be in the show notes here a discount link to the PDF that's going to last from now until the end of January. If you listen to this in the first month, you can get 50% off. And this is not just a transcript of our conversation here. We are going to write up a little blurb about each world, mainly about the way it interacts with the others, the trade. We still expect to use Van Richten's guide for like the governing information or the major cities or the things like that. We're going to have a bunch of plot hooks, but we'll give you an example of it a little bit later. We're going to have the write-up for the Ethereum, so if you want us to do the work of taking our Treasure Island write-up and changing it to spaceship. And then we're just going to have a bunch more plot hooks based on, like, Ravenloft monsters, Spelljammer monsters. Just, I really think, even if you just want to run a Spelljammer horror game, this is going to be useful for you.
Yeah. We're going to talk more about what's in the supplement and some of our ideas there a little bit later on. But just like with Sleepy Hollow, we wanted to be upfront because normally we provide this stuff for free, and we wish we could always provide it for free, but this was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so we are going to be charging for this, and we just want to make sure that you know so that you don't get to the end of the podcast and hear
surprise!
This. Yeah.
It's a commercial.
And if you get to the end of the podcast and are like, well, dang it, I can't swing, I don't remember what we're charging, but I can't swing
$1.99.
I can't swing $1.99, then maybe this will give you some great ideas of your own that you can use as a jumping off point to do your own Raven Nebula, and you don't have to worry about it.
I'm hoping to give you a lot more value in the write-up than just do the domains, but they're planets. But, do that if you want to do your own.
Yeah.
So for those of you like Rachel that haven't read the Spelljammer setting, and I understand that could a good percentage of our listeners, that might be more the Ravenloft than the Spelljammer. The way it works is you have your wildspace system, which is a solar system, basically. So for Faerun, for Forgotten Realms, it's called the Toral system. You have got the planet the Forgotten Realms is on, and then you've got a couple of other planets they establish in the older material that are in that same solar system. And then you have this thing called the Astral Sea. And that's more or less this kind of like hyperspace realm, sort of like nebula cloud thing. Sound familiar?
A cloud, you say?
When you're in the wild space system, when you're in the solar system, you need air, you need food, time passes normally. You're in like the material plane, just in space in the material plane. But when you get into the astral sea, you're sort of entering this more like theoretical cosmic realm. So they said that time doesn't really pass for you. So you don't really need to breathe. You don't really need to eat. Time will pass in the outside world, but not really for you there. So we, once again, as we mentioned, that kind of works perfect for what we're doing. So you've got the domains are these wild space systems. Each one is kind of a small planetoid. And maybe it has a couple like asteroids orbiting it, if you want some cool asteroid stuff orbiting Darkon. And then when you get to the borders of the wild space system, you go into the astral mist.
Unless the Dark Lord doesn't want you to.
Right, in which case the astral mist is closed. So we've got our wild space domains and then our astral mists. And another benefit to us kind of doing our own version of Ravenloft is you probably picked up that we're pretty big fans of the older material where you had like the core and you had kind of a unified setting.
I know we're incredibly subtle about it.
So that is a thing we can bring into this. And not just because it's the way we liked it to be, so we get to bring it back because ha 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 ha, but because, as we mentioned, trade is necessary for piracy. So to have this piratical setting, where that's a major part of like the space travel, we need to have trade between the domains. And to have trade between the domains, we need to have some kind of, like, defined geography. You need to have, as we said with the Sea of Sorrows in the previous episode, you have to know where things are going to be when you go back to have any kind of trade routes or mercantile system.
If you're going to raise Tortuga, you got to know where Tortuga is.
So this is taking a little bit from the older material. Take a drink / stamp your bingo cards.
I think that's the free space on our
bingo card. That is the free space, yeah. Well, in the older material. And the idea of mistways. So you have the astral mist, and if you have a mist token, just like in the 5e and Van Richten's Guide, if you have a mist token, you go to the astral mists, you will end up where you want to go unless the GM, the Dark Powers, wants you to go somewhere else. Like, there is that idea that the things are unpredictable. You could end up who knows where, who knows when. You could end up in the place that's the setting of the adventure the GM just bought. But most of the time, if you have a mist token, you'll end up where you want to go, which might take a long time. But taking something from the older material, we have the idea of mistways. That there are these certain points you can go to the border of a domain, and usually there's like a stable pathway through the mist to another domain.
And just like with Mist Talismans, sometimes the GM will say, not this time, it's not stable. But most of the time, it'll take you, like, I don't actually... Oh, yeah, I do remember one. Never mind.
There you go. I believe in you.
There was one from Darkon to Zerisia, the Paradon, the Jack the Ripper one. And so, like, most of the time, you go into that mistway from Darkon, you're going to end up in Zerisia / Paradon, and vice versa.
So we're imagining that you do have, in most wild space systems, when you get to the border, if you know the system, if you have good maps, you have an experienced navigator, there are mistways. And the mistways are much faster than going with just a mist talisman. And so you have the mist talisman plus the mistways, means it'll just be, it's probably safe, and it'll just be a couple of days to get from one domain to the other of travel. So that gives us trade. We have these, like, set trade routes. We have these mostly stable trade routes, and that gives us trade, and also the fact, and this is very important, that it's these specific kind of entrance and exit points in the solar system that give us great potential for piracy. That, the ship is gonna definitely come through this particular part of the Darkon system. That is an excellent place to ambush it and steal it and plunder it and raise the Jolly Roger. So this is a change from the Van Richten's Guide, where it is more each domain is this floating mist island, and you have a mist talisman, and you domain hop around. So Rachel, let's talk a little bit about some of the implications of this fundamental change we're making in the way you go from domain to domain.
One of the ways we're trying to make it different from standard issue Spelljammer is that one important thing with Ravenloft is that sense of uncertainty, that sense of randomness, that sense that the mists are going to send you where they want you to go, not where you want to go. And even if your GM never does that, you want it to be there. You want the PCs to always feel like it's dangerous to go into the mist, so they don't quite know what's going to happen, that they are taking their lives into their hands every time they step into the mist. So you need to make sure that, that there is talk, even if you never do it to your PCs, that there's all this talk of the mistways going astray, leading you somewhere else, the mist talismans not working and dumping you out in another place. And also it means that if you're going to be domain hopping, in Ravenloft as written in every edition, you can walk from one domain to the other. Whether you're walking across the border or walking into the mists, you can just, travel however you want. But if it's Spelljammer, you need to have your ship. And if you don't have your ship, you are stuck. Strahd doesn't even have to close the borders if he impounds your ship. So there's a lot of great potential there for trapping your PCs, for making them feel helpless, hopefully in a good way. How many times has the Doctor lost the TARDIS? So it's really easy and well-loved and well-respected trope of the genre that I don't think is going to raise any player hackles if sometimes something happens to their Spelljammer ship and they're just kind of stuck until it, syncs up with the proper wild space, whatever, and is able to fly again. Another thing with Spelljammer ships that actually is an advantage and is kind of more empowering is that if you're doing a really domain hopping adventure, then ships make great mobile bases so that you don't have to worry about your PCs having to leave all their stuff behind. You're not kind of punishing your PCs for the fact that you want to do a tour of all the mists rather than just kind of stationing them in one domain for the entire campaign. And I say this as someone who I think has never run anything except domain hopping games. It is kind of a source of frustration that there are certain things that you can't do, like certain resources that your players can't have, because they're just going to have to leave them behind and go to the next domain. If you've got a ship, you've got a mobile base, they can take all that stuff with them. It really gives them the best of both worlds in that respect.
Ships are so great.
Yeah.
I have never known any player that has not loved and jumped through whatever hoops the GM put in front of them to have their own ship, or their own airship, or their own magic TARDIS-like van. Like, PCs like two things. They like going from place to place, and they like having a room that they can put all their trophies in and, like, go to their room and have their room and knock on each other's doors and have conversations in their rooms. And this gives you both.
Yes. With the whole thing with the time being weird in the Astral Mist, that fits the mist beautifully. That way you could do things with... You could either have it feel like hours, but it's not hours. You could have it feel like days. You could have there be strange things lurking in the mist. I don't think in 5e do they still have the mist horrors and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you can have mist horrors. You can have all kinds of, like, mist monsters. You can have strange visions. There's all kinds of, like, cool, creepy encounter stuff you could build into the mist travel. And then, if you've got the Mistways and the Mist Talismans together, then you're making it a lot shorter. If you're going without a Mistway, then it's going to take you several days. Maybe with the Mistways, it only takes you one day, or, again, even hours.
So let's talk a bit about those myths and about the worlds, the wild space domains within those myths. Let's talk a little bit about how we're imagining the Raven Nebula. So the Raven Nebula is this cluster of planetoids because none of the domains are, like, a planet-sized.
Maybe Darkon.
Maybe Darkon. But honestly, like, think of the last sci-fi thing you saw where a planet was an actual planet and not, like, 3 towns and a forest. Like, you absolutely could have an episode of Star Trek or some kind of Star Wars adventure where they go to planet Rishmallow and it's a city and they're there the whole time and that's the whole adventure and that is the experience of planet Rishmallow.
Yeah.
So... planetoids, we're imagining for most of them, if not all of them, there is one moon and one sun, just because that avoids complications with things like vampires, things like lycanthropy. Maybe even all of these planetoids are in the same solar system, just separated by the mist. Because we have the going through the mist and mistways, you can't actually know the geographical difference between Borca and Darkon. You just know how long it takes you to travel through the mistway between Borca and Darkon. And we're imagining they're pulling in ships, people, worlds from all across the astral sea. The nebula is kind of a demiplane, so the whole spelljammer cosmos. You will have people are flying through the astral sea, then suddenly, like, the astral sea in canon's kind of like purpley pinky, and suddenly it gets kind of grayish, and then they come out and they're in the Raven Nebula. So because it's pulling in not just worlds, but also ships from all over Astral Sea, all over the Spelljammer setting, I'm imagining that in the Raven Nebula, you do have more of the crazy Spelljammer races, Thrykeens, Plasmoids, all that, but it's mainly centered around ports and commerce. So that the ports are much more cosmopolitan. Like, if you go to Martira Bay in Darkon, you might see some ant people and some Akakra and some plasmoids all drinking at a tavern together.
A cantina.
At a cantina together, thank you. But not really outside of the ports. Like, the rest of the domain is going to be the kind of flavor, horror movie, horror genre inspired flavor that it has. So, Barovia, where I'm imagining Valakai is the main port. There might be some ant people in Valakai, but there's not going to be, like, the terrified ant people peasants huddling in their huts in the village of Barovia, hoping Strahd doesn't drink their weird acidic blood.
But that could be an interesting thing.
Could be an interesting thing.
And having the mistways lets us have some kind of geography, you know, again, like we were talking about for having a sense of the core, but also having a sense of piracy. So Darkon is still this major port that has a gazillion mistways. So it's huge, it's got a lot of supporting the sea. Darkon's incredibly important for trade.
And, like, in the Van Richten's guide, they said Martira Bay is a major port, but what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And this means something. This means that Darkon has a million mistways. Like, Darkon is a crossroads of the whole nebula.
You can have that, Borka borders Barovia. That there's a mistway that connects Borka straight to Barovia. There's a bunch of cultural overlap with Borka and Barovia. In the older stuff, they couldn't quite decide whether they wanted Borka to also be Eastern European or to be Italian, and in 5e they decided on Eastern European, so we both have kind of the Eastern Europe thing going, the cultural connection, and it makes sense for them to be close to each other and have kind of a linguistic connection and whatnot. Whereas it's much farther away from Harakir. You gotta go through a whole lot of mistways to get to Harakir. We don't see a whole lot of, like, Middle Eastern influence in Borka, so it's clearly pretty separate from there. You can either use the old core map for ideas of proximity. You can Google image search it. It's right
very
there.
Easily, yeah,
very easily. To get an idea of where the old stuff used to border. Or you can make up your own. You can just decide what domains you think are connected, what domains does it work best for your campaign for them to be connected, and which do you want them to be distant, and it can travel at the speed of plot. That's the wonderful thing with being a GM, is that if you look at the core and you say, yeah, you know what, I really need Haslan to border Darkon, you can make Haslan border Darkon.
In our current game, we had a section where we're in Borka, and we're going to Haslan, and we had to go through Barovia and have a bunch of adventures. And, you can do that in this version of Ravenloft. That makes sense. We are taking, by the way, I want to be very clear, I'm taking this from the hyperspace lanes in Star Wars. But that we don't know if you measured it with a giant tape measure how far from Borka to Barovia to Haslan. But the whole...
12 parsecs.
Oh, there you go. But Borka has a missed way to Barovia, but not to Haslan. But then Barovia has a missed way to Haslan. So to go efficiently from Borka to Haslan, you have to go through Barovia. I'm very glad I didn't mess any of that up. So you can still keep that sense of travel and that sense of there being a geography to the setting, which I think is a very useful thing for a GM to have.
Yeah. And, once again, if you're kind of making this map your own, if you're kind of connecting everything yourself, then you can do, I really wanted my party to have these adventures in Barovia, and so that worked out great. But you can do, whatever domains you want them to go through, you can make sure that they're on the way from, the domain that they want to go to and the domain that they're in. And that way you're kind of, controlling the path that they're taking without it being as obvious a railroading as the mist snatching them up and dropping them off somewhere, which you can get away with once or twice, but it gets really old after a while.
Like, that's just like in real life, if I want to be in Italy and I want to go to Spain, I pretty much have to go through France. That's not railroading. Well, it is, because I'll be literally on a railroad. But that's just the way maps work.
And as we mentioned in the write-up, we have some notes and hooks for kind of the wild space versions of the domain. The main info is still going to be in Van Guide. Like, we're not going to be giving you the stats for Chakuna all over again. You gotta go to the Van Guide for that. But we are doing these kind of spelljammery sci-fi versions of the domains. So, my sweet baby Borka.
Drink. Bingo.
Bingo.
That's B. B for Borka, everybody.
Because it's the best domain of all. So with Borka, you've got the Baritsi Trading Company, you've got Ivana's perfumes and everything. It's this incredibly wealthy, bustling port. It's not as cosmopolitan as Darkon. It doesn't have as many mistways, but the mistways that it does have are constantly thrumming with activity. Ivana no doubt has all kinds of guards set up on their side of the mistway, and there are pirates slavering on the other sides of the mistways if they're not well defended. And there's just all kinds of just trades and shipments and luxury goods coming out from Borka. There is the strange and mysterious Lament Station that's out there somewhere that they lost contact with a while ago, and no one knows quite what's going on there.
Asteroid orbiting the planet.
And then for the plot hook for it that we had, we came up with, you come across one of these ships that was sent out from Borka. There's a distress call, and you get on, and everyone on board is either dead or, acting strangely. We've got some kind of, Naked Time from Star Trek going on. Just weird things are happening. And eventually it comes out that they were shipping some perfume from Ivana, and somebody on the crew opened one of her special perfume bottles. So, and the smell got out and just infected everyone somehow, whatever way you want it to be as a GM. So you get kind of that naked time or that finding that ghost ship, adventure that's a staple of sci-fi, but in a way that makes sense for Ravenloft.
And we are, as I said, adding a domain to this. You're going to get all the ones from Van Richten's Guide as Planets with a little bit about the trade, the relationship with some of the others. But we were adding this domain called the Ethereum. And that is where we're doing our treasure planet. That's where we're having Long John Silver on a spaceship. And we're imagining that this is a major crossroads. Much like Darkon, the Ethereum is dozens and dozens and dozens of mistways. It is this very large wild space domain full of asteroids, full of moons, full of dangerous places where shipwrecks happen and moons that make excellent places for pirate ports. And there's all this trade going through it because it is this major crossroad. And it includes Treasure Planet, where Flint's Nautilus ship loaded with treasure is waiting to be discovered. So I really like this idea. I'm really excited and proud of this idea.
Tom loves sci-fi horror.
I sure do.
We mentioned Event Horizon. It just, anytime you see anything with a ghost spaceship, he just is salivating. It was just made just for him.
Spelljammer has a horror element. Spelljammer kind of has two main settings, and one is goofy space opera, and one is sci-fi horror. And by merging it into Ravenloft, you really can make it a horror setting. You can really play up the horror. And in D&D, a lot of the way you get horror is the different monsters. And by bringing this into Ravenloft, this gives you all these great monsters you have as an option for your Spelljammer games. So, for example, in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, we have the Body Taker plants. That, the Invasion of Body Snatchers, one of the classic sci-fi horror movies. The sort of pod people replacements is one of the classic sci-fi horror premises. And this lets you do Invasion of the Body Snatchers with Spelljammer. And Spelljammer, the guide that came out, also had some really good monsters. Really good, really scary monsters. You had the Fear, F-I-E-R, which is this kind of nightmare eater. Which, how is that not in Ravenloft? This monster that sort of puts people to sleep and then gives them nightmares and then eats their fear until they die. Like, that's such a good horror monster, and this lets you really ground that in a horror setting. So another thing we're going to do to continue the advertisement, I mean not an advertisement, in the write-up, I want to give you more value than make the domains planets, and we're going to have some plot hooks based on Spelljammer monsters and based on Ravenloft monsters. So to give you one of those that kind of combines two, we've got the Headless Starlancer. So this is using the stats for a Doulahan from Guide to Ravenloft, but it's riding one of those Starlancer, like, space dolphins. And the idea that you've got our Headless Horseman, but it's a space Headless Horseman who is stalking the PC ship through the astral mist. So they're sailing through the astral mist, but every so often, this guy will just swoop out of the astral mist and start trying to cut people's heads off. And they have to kind of figure out what's drawing him to their ship, why he's targeting the people he's targeting. Do a little bit of Tim Burton, Sleepy Hollow detective work. If you're interested in this and you want to check out our Raven Nebula supplement, then there'll be a link in the show notes. It'll be on DM's Guild. And as mentioned, until the end of January, the link will have a 50% discount. So normally it's going to be $1.99, it'll be 99 cents. Our little holiday present to you, dear listener.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Festive Yule.
The Happy Feast of Gropthar's Ascension.
By Gropthar's Hammer. What a savings.
And if you want to check out some of our other work, including stuff you can pay for, if you're like, wow, I really felt great giving them money.
We want to encourage that feeling.
Yeah, right?
We've got 3 kids, guys. Groceries are expensive right now.
The little clue to when we're recording this, I hope.
Yeah.
Then I've got some other adventures on DM's Guild. The adventures, much like with Sleepy Hollow, since they're a lot more work, they're pay. I do have adapting horror movies, including some by John Carpenter, and I'm hoping at the time of recording that by the time of broadcasting I'll have something with Event Horizon. If not, then hopefully soon. So if you're like, oh boy, sci-fi horror, I love that, I'm hoping to be able to do an Event Horizon adaptation for Spelljammer at some point in the future, which is when you are listening to this.
And then for me, if you heard that little Night Before Christmas parody at the beginning and you said, by Jove, I really like the way that she takes rhymes and makes them spooky.
She wrote that in minutes. It was amazing.
I have a book, Mother Ghost, Nursery Rhymes for Little Monsters. It's 13 classic nursery rhymes written to be about Halloween. So I also have short stories for adults on my website, www.rachelkoehler.com, and most of them are available online for free. So if getting a picture book is too much, go check those out.
And if they decide that they want to tell us about some of the Spelljammer Ravenloft adaptations they've made, how can they contact us?
Well, you can email us at wonderfulworldofdarklords@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at Wonderful World of Darklords, and on Twitter. This was recorded and uploaded on Red Circle and ready to go, and then that moon-faced, smug little plutocrat happened. Yeah, we're not on Twitter anymore. Our account is technically still active, just in case things change, but we're no longer posting there. So you can email us at wonderfulworldofdarklords@gmail.com, or you can find us at Wonderful World of Darklords on Facebook and Tumblr.
It's Holiday Miracle. Until next time, which will hopefully just be in about 3 weeks. Thank you for listening. Happy gaming. Happy holidays. And I'm still here.
This has been The Wonderful World of Darklords. We have no affiliation with Disney or Wizards of the Coast. All music recordings used in this episode are in the public domain and were obtained through museopen.org. Titles and links are in the show notes. The Wonderful World of Darklords logo was designed by Haylight Jones. You can find links to their work in the show notes. Thanks for listening. So, yeah, as mentioned, if you are interested in this, if you want to, check out our Raven Nebula. As mentioned, if you are interested in this, if you want to check out our Raven Nebula supplement.
Oh, got a stinger.
So once again, as mentioned, if you're interested in this, if you want to check out our Raven Nebula supplement. I've got the yips.
Oh no! Do you want me to do this part?
Yes.
As mentioned, if you're interested in this and you want to check out our Raven... You good?
Just you were saying it word for word, it cracked me up.